Welcome, welcome, everyone. Everyone's joining, singing their favorite Christmas songs to themselves, getting all excited for Christmas and to talk about all that holiday stress and how we build stress resilience. Um, Welcome, everyone, to our webinar today, Building Stress Resilience for Teacher and Student Success. I have the honors of introducing our presenters today. And I've had the opportunity to not only work closely with Shantell and Will for the last few years, but see them present on this topic multiple times. And I'm really excited to introduce them and to continue learning from them on this topic. Shantell is um, has has her MA in education with a reading science concentration and dyslexia certification. As a reading specialist and dyslexia interventionist, she has worked closely with Reading Horizons for the past 16 years. She has trained and educated thousands of educators as a national presenter and a consultant on the science of reading and dyslexia. After she acquired her degree, she was an English teacher for 3 years, tutor in reading and English for 15 years, and a dyslexia tutor for 10 years. The catalyst for her graduate work and professional path was all based around her desire to help one of her three children who was diagnosed with dyslexia and dysgraphia. And I've heard Shantell talk a lot about how personal this work is to her. Since then, Shantell has acquired advanced training and certifications in Norton Gillingham from um, the IDA and letters and so many more. She's currently a doctoral candidate in the Reading Science program at Mount St. Joseph, and her graduate thesis addressed research identifying the correlation between motivation and reading outcomes. She is passionate about her dedicated her life's work to raising awareness about the importance of effective reading instruction for every student, especially individuals with dyslexia, with the goal of helping the individual as a whole. Dr. Will Blake brings a uniquely diverse background to the work of supporting educator well-being. A former physician with emphasis in lifestyle medicine, Dr. Blake spent years helping patients build healthier and more sustainable lives. He later served as a CEO of a healthcare operations company, leading teams through high-stress environments while improving systems and outcomes. Today, he's an educator in special education resource classrooms where he works directly with students who need extra support. His move from medicine and executive leadership into the classroom gives him a rare and holistic perspective on stress, resilience, and habits that help people thrive in demanding roles. His work focuses on practical evidence-based strategies that we'll talk about today and that will help educators strengthen their mental, emotional, and physical well-being in the real world and in schools. Super excited to keep learning from you today. Thank you so much for being here, and I will hand it off to you.
Thanks so much, Corey. We are excited to be here and share this with you. And as Corey mentioned, it is timely. This time of year, we tend to feel more stress than we normally do, which is a lot. So we're excited to share these strategies with you and have you have some tools to leave with to help support yourself and your students that you work with. So there is a QR code. Maybe you've already clicked on it. This will take you to a Padlet. There's going to be resources that we're going to make available to you along with a PDF of our presentation today. So our agenda, what we'd like you to walk away from with this, having learned about the stress response and how it affects teacher and student performance, although we're going to spend a little bit more time on student performance. We're going to help you learn strategies for building stress resilience for you and your students and understand the correlation between explicit instruction and stress reduction. And then we'll end with summarizing some of those key takeaways and leave some time for question and answers. So in education, we know that teaching does not equal learning. And so that engagement is a critical part of what we do. So we are going to provide some opportunities for engagement and ask you to do that if possible. We'll do a couple core responses, just a couple, you'll stay muted, but just for that engagement, for you to connect with what we're doing, some retrieval opportunities and a reflection at the end. So Will and I actually grew up in the same small town in Idaho. This is the junior high we went to. And we had the same math teacher, Mrs. Smith. And interestingly enough, as we reflected back on what we learned, we don't remember all the math concepts that we learned, but we do remember that Mrs. Smith brought in strategies to help reduce our stress. Specifically, she did progressive muscle relaxation. She taught us what that was, how to use it, and she would do that for us before tests. And I remember times we would walk in and maybe there was some other stressful events going on in school and we'd say, oh, could we do a progressive muscle relaxation? And she'd say yes. And it's interesting that we both remember that as a takeaway of something. And I know we'll talk about this later, of strategies we still use in our life thanks to that learning and support from Mrs. Smith. So we're thanking her. This started it. And our first experience of that in a school, we don't always see that. And that may not seem like the norm, but if it becomes normalized, it can become a really powerful tool to facilitate learning. So we're going to start with a breathing exercise. Think about using your belly and expanding that. And you're just going to follow. You'll hear it'll count you down and show when you're going to breathe in and breathe out. We'll talk about what this type of breathing is a little bit later. But everyone, we're just going to start off and activate our parasympathetic nervous system before we dive in. Okay, I would just like you to take note of how you're feeling right now, especially after a long, stressful school day. And hopefully you can identify and be aware of some of the things that you're feeling right now, because Will's going to talk about the effects of stress, and then we'll dive into strategies for you. So, Will, turn it over to you. Oh, you're muted, Will.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And what I'm feeling is that that 60 seconds felt like a really, really, really long 60 seconds when we're just sitting here doing it together. And it is kind of surprising how just brief moments of time can do that. And we may talk a little bit about that a little bit later, but let's start with what stress is. And why I'm here is because stress is a physiologic response. It's something that happens to us whether we want to or not. We say, oh, I'm under stress or whatever. But if we can understand what it is, we can understand why we respond the way that we do, then it helps us to be able to understand what we can do to be able to relieve some of that stress and how to deal with it. And I think mostly for me, it helps me to understand that I'm not broken. That when I feel certain ways that it's like that there's nothing wrong with me, that my body's actually doing what it's supposed to do. And so that's some of the reason why I'm here today to explain some of this to you so that you too can feel that part of it, especially right now when I literally just finished up with my fourth grade math resource class about an hour ago, and I could have used a lot of extra breathing for those for myself during that time as I was trying to get all of them literally the day before the Christmas break on task for the last time that I was going to be seeing them. But let's start with what it is. It is essentially it's any type of a threat to an organism's homeostasis, or meaning us as humans, we are a living organism. We want to stay in balance. That's what it's trying to keep us in is stress. It's a threat to that balance to where we can operate in a good and physiologically healthy way. It's not just a threat, and we'll talk about the different types of threats, but it could also be a perceived threat. So something that's not necessarily even physically there. And perceived threats, and this is a whole other type that we could talk about, but perceived threats can actually be more of the threats that we start to see today. But essentially, it's an automatic physiologic response to a threat that causes the release of certain chemicals in our body that prepare us to survive. And this leads us to what we call the stress response. And there's this cascading event of things that happen where a certain stressor or threat comes into our life. Generations ago, if we had to run away from a bear, this was evolutionarily built into us that we would run from the bear or that we would fight the bear. And this would be able to happen because of what happens inside of us. We recognize there's a bear, there's chemicals that are released, both some neural chemicals like adrenaline and some endocrine or hormonal uh, chemicals like cortisol. And when these are released, it prepares our body to be able to run. It's what we need to do to be able to fight back if we need to. So we're much more alert, and we're going to talk a little bit about more of it. But essentially, the goal is that we're going to survive. We need to be able to survive. And that is essentially just an alarm system. It lets us know, hey, there's something that you need to be ready for. It floods our system with all of these things. And I just want you to think for a moment when you are undergoing something stressful, what it is that you feel like. Usually it's not that we're going to be feeling like that comfort that we feel when we do something like that breathing response that we have. We get really tense, we get upset, our heart rate goes, and we're going to talk about all of those. So there's some type of stressor or threat is perceived by any of our senses. It could be one of our physical senses or something even just like we talked about a perceived threat that happens that we're afraid of in our brain and we see it as a threat. And through a series of cascading events, um, our brain releases some hormones and some um, neural chemicals that come down and help us to release from our adrenal glands some epinephrine type chemicals and cortisol. And you've probably heard of those are the most common in adrenaline and cortisol. They're not all of the chemicals that are released, but those are the two main ones. And we're going to explain to you why that happens. Now, in a normal human, in a normal day, there's a normal amount of cortisol that happens throughout the day. So if we wake up, there's right after the time, a couple hours after we wake up, there's typically a normal peak of that release. And that's because cortisol's job is to help us with focus, energy, and action. And in the early morning, we want that. We typically get a good, healthy peak of cortisol in there. And then as we go throughout the day, we end up having it to lower down to a baseline level because that's when our body is going to be resting or recovering, and we recover overnight. And so we don't want the cortisol in there that high at the night because it helps us to be able to get back to a recovery or back to a baseline level. When we undergo acute stressful events throughout the day, so I can just, if I look at these peaks here, it's like, okay, there's my fourth grade math students, there's my fifth grade reading group, there's my kindergarten writing group. I can see all those different stressful events. Oops, there's one with one of the general ed teachers coming down and asking me why I did something wrong. Oh, and there's the principal walking in to my office with one of the district administrators or into my room with the district administrator while I'm trying to teach them. So all of these different events, these peaks are things that will increase my stress response because they're potential threats and to me. And as that happens, you see that the cortisol levels will increase during that time, but we want that there because it helps me to have more focus, more energy, and action during that time. Now, later throughout the day, we'll see that ultimately it comes down to a nice level point to where we were at the beginning of the day. So that tomorrow morning, we start right back off where we were this morning. Now, if we go on to something more problematic, or for those of us who have any type of chronic stressful state, if you look at the green line, this would be a more chronic state, and our cortisol levels don't peak as high as they do because we've used a lot of it up, and it's just not balanced the right, and the feedback loop isn't right, and we'll see that we don't get the same clean responses that we get for those other stressful parts of the day. And ultimately, even if you look at the end of the day, our baseline level ends up higher than where we were in the morning. And that's can be the real problem with a chronic stressful state. And we'll talk about why that's more important in just a minute. There are two systems that control stress in our body. One is the sympathetic nervous system, and I don't want to get too detailed in what this is, but this is the system that controls the stress response, or the fight or flight. It's what gets us ready so that we can run away from that bear, or that we can run away from that, the third grade student that's got the runny nose and is sneezing all over you. It's what is responsible for releasing adrenaline and cortisol. And we'll see a number of things that happen to us physically because of that release of chemicals. The other system is the parasympathetic nervous system, and its job is to balance out the sympathetic nervous system. It helps us to control our recovery response. We refer to it as the rest and digest phase. A lot of wellness people are talking more and more about the vagus nerve and its importance, and this system is what activates and controls the vagus nerve, and that helps us to be into the system to where we can actually recover more. And it's kind of the opposite effect of the sympathetic nervous system. Uh, Ultimately, what happens is chronic stress is that if we keep having days where our baseline gets increased, we'll have those peaks of stress, and then our baseline just doesn't reach it was, and then we'll get above what we call this recovery zone. And we chronic stress we would define as not being able to get into that recovery zone, so that next morning when you wake up, you haven't been able to recover overnight, and now you're starting at a more stressful place, and that can cause a number of problems physically, which we'll talk about it. But that whole part is balanced between the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic, and the parasympathetic system. So if we look at the physiologic effects, or the things that are happening in your body, and look at these, and as you look at these, and as we discuss this, think about the things that happen to you when you notice that your heart rate, or that when you notice that you're stressed out. And I've got, many of us have watches that will watch our respiratory rate, or our heart rate, or another number of physiologic factors. I can actually watch myself, and I can see, yesterday or 2 days ago, I had a situation where I was pushing in with a kindergarten teacher, and it was a rough day for her. It's Christmas holiday, we know it, and she had just had enough of those kindergarten students, and she just broke down and left the school crying. And I could, at that point when she left and I was there on my own, with trying to clean up the mess that was there with those students, I could definitely see that my heart rate was about 50% higher than it is effect of adrenaline and cortisol pumping through my veins as I tried to tame those little kindergarten students. But the physiologic effects of that are that we'll get an increased heart rate. We'll have an increased alert system. And if you notice all of these things, these physiologic effects, there are all things that help us to survive when we're having to run from a bear. We don't need to have a healthy immune system when we're running from a bear. All of those things are shut down, and the things that help us to run from a bear are the things that ramp up. And over time, what will happen is we'll get some type of physical manifestation of that. So where we might be able to feel an increased heart rate, or it's a little bit more difficult to feel that our blood pressure is increased, but over time we can start developing headaches, we get heart problems, we can get some fatigue or some pain, muscle tension. We can feel digestive problems because we don't need to be digesting our food when we're running from a bear. And if our body doesn't get a chance to digest that food and our GI system is all messed up, it's because of this type of thing. Definitely problems with sleep because, again, this when we've got too much of that cortisol and too much of that chronic stress in our system. If we're not able to come down to a recovery place, it's intended to keep us alert so that we can be ready to fight off danger. And that's exactly the opposite of what we need to be happening at night if we're wanting a good night's rest. Ultimately, chronic stress can lead to burnout, where we will just become exhausted. We can see our performance is reduced. We can be, extremely unable to just cope in a lot of situations. I think that's kind of what was happening with the kindergarten teacher that I was in her class the other day. I think she just was unable to cope with that and clearly exhausted from from a first semester of challenges with those kindergarten students. And we can see physical symptoms of that when we're experiencing burnout. All of those things that we talked about that physically can happen through the time, we can see that this burnout doesn't happen um, slow or quickly. It's the type of thing that develops very quietly, and doesn't come from a single bad day that we have. It's the accumulation of these things that are happening with us over time. If we come back to this diagram, and we see that on the where our cortisol levels don't come down back into what we would call the recovery zone, we would see that that's where we're not able to get that full recovery that we need at night that's going to set us up for additional bad days and such. And it's interesting because there are things that we can do to affect the level of that recovery zone, which is more of a long-term way of being able to reduce our stress. And there are things that we can see that will affect us from the actual plot, things that will reduce our stress on a daily, on a short-term basis. And some of those things you may have experienced, when you're just like, okay, my principal came in and knew that I was having a rough day and just came in and gave me some temporary relief. Like that's something that's going to help us on a short-term basis. The challenge is though, to really affect that, where to get us back under that recovery zone, is that we need to be able to have something that's going to to increase our trust and our capacity over the long term. It's the certainty of that, being able to rely on that principle for times that we're going to have it. It's not just that, okay, we did it that one time, but I don't know what's going to happen next week. Am I going to need it again? And what do I do then? Maybe the principal's not going to be available. So there's two different parts of this uh, where we can be able to affect how do we become feeling less stressful. There's a couple of other things that we see specifically in school, and one of those is the stress contagion effect. And we've actually measured the levels of cortisol and being higher in students when their teachers are burned out. I mean, and it's the same thing happens you know, the opposite way around. When you have stressed out students, that will affect the teacher's level of stress. If you have stressed out administration, the teachers will be like, so we don't know why that happens. We just know that it's contagious. It literally is something that we can measure. And when we're looking at school situations, it's not just some of these physical things that will happen that we listed, the things that you can see and feel, like you can feel that fatigue, you can feel that urgency, you can feel that alertness. There's some things that the stress can do to alter the brain because it can disrupt our nerve synapse regulation. So that can decrease our level of sociability. Most people, when they're stressed out, they don't want to be social. It's like the last thing that you want is to be around more people. And you can see this also in students. Some of the students, when they pull away or they avoid interactions with others, that's could be a sign that they're undergoing stress. It can literally kill brain cells, and particularly in the prefrontal cortex, where a lot of the executive function skills happening. And that's one of the tasks that I get tasked with in my resource classes, helping some of the students develop some of those executive functioning skills. And if they're in a state of stress, anything that I'm going to do to be able to help them with developing executive function skills is going to be counterproductive. There's a lot of things that Shantell is going to talk a little bit more about how stress affects learning, and here are some of those, but definitely we will see impaired memory. We'll see a decrease in or impairment of the consolidation. We can see negative effects on their motivation, on their attention and focus. All of these things, they're all physiologic responses. It's not something that the children or that you are choosing when you feel this way. This is your body's way of evolving, ultimately to be able to keep you safe over the long term.
Awesome. Thank you, Will. We're going to dive into now strategies to help get into that recovery zone. Before we do, if you can, go ahead and put in the chat. This is just a reflection moment. Something new you learned about stress that you didn't know before. For time, we'll just give it a minute and you can add it in later as we move forward. But just give it a few seconds. If there's anything you learned new that you didn't know before that you'd like to share, you can drop it in that chat. I know for me, understanding the importance of recovering, that it wasn't something that I couldn't stop my response, but I could control how I recovered, was a point of help for me in being able to kind of get back to that recovery place. So let's talk a little bit about other strategies that we can do to build stress resilience. So Grace LeConte is a strategic risk expert, and she talks about the 4 responses to fear, that feeling that's coming up. And you can kind of see where that fits on this continuum and how students think about how you show up and how students show up in the classroom. But when we feel that, our reaction may be to fight, and that's going to be attack or anger. And these are students who are acting out. And so a lot of times we see that behavior and kind of tie it to who the student is. But understanding that it's likely the stress response is really helpful to mitigating that behavior. We've got students who will flee. Those are the ones who ask for the hall pass. They want to leave. They don't want to be in there, especially students who struggle with reading. They don't want to read out loud. That time in class comes, I am going to the bathroom. I'm out of class. Or they may freeze, put their head on their desk. That was my son. I'm just not even going to engage. I'm not going to disrupt, but I'm not going to engage. And there is fawning. That's another response where it's kind of people pleasing. It tends to show up more with women. But there is all of those. There is a 4th option where this is where we can come in with that choice of facing it. And we do that through, again, that physiologic response. We can't control it right in that moment, but we can recover how we react and respond to it with these tools. So how we build that stress resilience, some of these tools that we're going to talk through today is first support. We're going to dive in if you're an admin, support for teachers, and teachers support for students. And all of these can be support for yourself. And then some balance strategies to get us back in that homeostasis. Changing perceptions is really more applicable to perceived threats. And that's not something for time's sake we're going to go into today, but something we'd be happy to present more on at a future point. We're going to talk about creating control using routines. That's a really big thing that we can do in classrooms. And employing parasympathetic nervous system activating techniques, getting us to that rest and digest, like using progressive muscle relaxation like Mrs. Smith did. And then we're going to talk about what worked, what didn't, what do we need to revise, and then repeating so that these also become a routine that students and teachers can use. So providing supports, if you're an administrator, these are some of the things to be mindful of that we can reduce stress through our support. First of all, if we have a program or initiative, if there's not sufficient training, that can create stress because there's lack of knowledge and confidence in that implementation. And if we don't know how to use that, that's going to increase our stress. Also, if we don't have the necessary resources to implement what we've been asked to do, that creates those acute stress situations and over a long time. Another way we can support is through giving praise, making sure our environment is psychologically safe and that we give teachers autonomy. And that's a lot tied to motivation as well. One of my favorite quotes from Dr. Louisa Moats, given at Big Sky back in 2023, she said, "We need deeply knowledgeable teachers with agency to apply what they know and empowered with effective tools." So that's kind of encapsulates all of this, right? So building knowledge, making sure we get the training and those tools and agency to implement that. As teachers for our students, one of the key things, and I'm going to end talking briefly about this today, is providing explicit instruction, because there's decades of evidence on how that's going to reduce stress, cognitive load, and facilitate that necessary support for student learning. Of course, providing the resources and scaffolds for our students, and again, for our students, giving praise and creating that environment that's psychologically safe, and providing autonomy within the classroom when it's appropriate. Really quickly, this story, back in COVID time, when everyone was watching a lot of Netflix, there was a show called 100 Humans. They were doing research studies. They would take a control group and an experimental group. This activity was really interesting. They brought in a professional plate spinner, and they had two groups, where they put them all together, and then there's going to be two things that they manipulate here. So they all learned how to spin plates, and they brought them in to perform for that professional plate spinner and two of the judges from the show. What was the variable, what they manipulated, is regardless of how that participant did, the judge could not give authentic feedback. There was a little jar that he pulled balls from, and if it was a blue ball, he gave positive feedback, red ball, negative feedback. So, for example, there was one that did really well. They had a point system. She scored really high on the point system, but his feedback, he pulled the red ball. So it was like, oh, you didn't do very good. There wasn't a lot of energy. And then someone who couldn't even keep the plate on the stick pulled the blue ball and just, oh, your effort was fantastic. I can see your potential. What was interesting is then they had them go away after the feedback, practice some more, no additional instruction or coaching, come back and perform again. You can imagine what those results were. Those that had received the positive feedback increased their scores by an average of 5.2%. Those that had the negative feedback dropped by 2.2%. Some that had been proficient before couldn't do it anymore. The person that couldn't even keep the plate on the stick nailed it when he came back, just from the feedback. So praise really is something that gets underutilized in schools. There's a lot of evidence on behavior-specific praise that can make a significant difference in supporting our students. So these next, as we get into these balance strategies, Will's going to talk about a couple of these, and then we'll dive into a little bit more of some classroom instruction.
Okay, so I don't know if we have any basketball fans here, but if we do, think about what is the most stressful thing that a basketball player has to do. What's their most stressful event or task that they have? And many will say the same thing, even though it's unguarded, it's the easiest thing. There's the most stress because it's so easy, right? But it's the free throw. And most of the professional players will agree because everyone's staring at you. You got a free shot. Anyway, we're going to show you a clip here from Steve Nash. He's one of the top. He's the top ranked free throw percentage shooter in the NBA when he was in the league, and he's going to tell you how he was able to get to that point of being so productive with his free throw shots.
Steve Nash, currently the all-time leader in free throw percentage. He's percentage points ahead of Mark Price.
I think I was in the 10th grade and I had a coach that said you should do exactly the same thing every time you shoot the ball. So I decided then that I was going to dribble the ball 3 times, take a deep breath, and shoot the ball. So it's a routine that's been with me for, over 20 years. So, I've stuck with it, and I feel comfortable in it. And, when you practice something and you stick with the routine, you take away all the unknown variables that allows you just to feel confident and focus in on the technique. I mean, just 1 or 2 practice shots for me without the ball. I think it's, people talk about visualizing and how important that can be to success as a shooter. I think that's true, but this is like visualizing plus. It allows me not only to see the ball go in the basket, but to feel my mechanics, and most importantly as a shooter, to feel your rhythm.
So it's interesting that someone in that situation, in such a stressful event, we can actually physically measure the amount of stress that person is under by looking at their heart rate, looking at their respiratory rate, even by getting a quick swab of their saliva for some cortisol. We can see that in those situations where performance is really required at the highest level, that using routines, and we'll talk a little bit about why even making it kind of ritualistic can help decrease that level of stress that we're under, so that we are able to better to be able to be more productive and to keep ourselves at a kind of a more stable place. Some of the things that are that we would recommend when you're doing any type of routine, and this is something that I've seen works really well for some of the students that I'm teaching or responsible for. Consistency is very key. Anything that breeds uncertainty is the thing that's going to cause the most stress that we can. Whenever we're uncertain. So for students, uh, especially those that are needing to be seen in my resource class, the uncertainty is what causes them to be even more stressful. And uncertainty in my life as a teacher, when I'm in those classrooms with them, if I've got something that's coming in and then there's a surprise visit by somebody, or there's a, oh no, we're going to have a special meeting with administration in the, after school, anything like that, it takes us out of our routine. And when we get out of our routine, our brain gets into this place to where it sees that as a threat. And so here's some tips that we can use when we're making the routine. We want to make those routines very simple. Um, the more simple the routine, the easier it is to remember, especially for our students when we're trying to talk that they can't keep multiple actions, simultaneously or in a row. We want to be able to use parasympathetic activator actions as appropriate, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is more in a minute. But if you remember, the parasympathetic nervous system is something that helps us to be able to get into that balance place. It counterbalances that sympathetic nervous system, or the stress response. It helps get us back into a recovery mode. And something as simple as doing that breathing exercise, or even for Steve Nash as he's getting ready to be able to do that, it's just a couple deep breaths as he does it. It helps to be able to calm him down. Adding mindfulness to be able to create some type of consciousness in this routine. We don't want to do these rituals in a brainless way. We just want to do it. We want to be able to be present with them, because as we're present with them, then our body can stay in, and our mind can stay more grounded in that. And as we stay more grounded in that action, then it's more safe for our brain and less of a threat. We want to be able to include multiple senses in both sides of the brain. When we do that, it allows our brain it kind of occupies our brain with all of those things. So if we can smell something, if we can listen to something, if we can taste something, if we can feel something, if we can do any of those, any or combination of those, and preferably even all of them, what we're doing is we're kind of inundating our brain with safety. And so then we're much less likely to be able to have anything that could come in that would be a particular threat. And we want to be able to make it easy to remember, some type of an easy trigger, so that it's like, okay, when we come in, what do? We grab our folders and we put them on the desk. We grab a pencil, we put it on the desk. And very simple routines for students, also very simple things for me as a teacher when I come into to begin the day. I've got my routine where I come in and bring I bring my bag, I put my bag down, I pull my iPad out of it, I pull my folder out, I put it away, I put my lunch into the refrigerator, and then I get back and then I start a certain routine. I found this to be effective all the way back from, like Shantell was talking about, with Mrs. Smith in ninth grade. It wasn't ninth grade. It was, I forget which junior high. And I will say, yes, we had the same teacher. It was not the same year. She's much younger than me. And it was not at the same time. So anyway, we'll leave it at that. We were not in the same grade or the same class. Um, so one of the things that I remember learning from that, though, is that as I went through to continue to take through a lot of schooling, through college, through medical school, even through board exams in my professional career, uh, I developed a particular pre-test routine that I had. And it was as simple as I would take my pencil, I would put it on the ground there in the testing center at my university, and I would take 60 seconds and I would go through a rapid progressive muscle relaxation technique. Everyone else is busy scribbling away, and I would do that with every single time that I had a test. That was my routine, to be able to get my breathing in check, to get my heart rate under control, so that I could be at my top performance. Some of these parasympathetic nervous system activating techniques are listed here. Uh, this is not an exhaustive list, but there's just some of the things that you may see again in some of the wellness influencers are promoting now. The exercise that we went through earlier was a breathing exercise. We call it resonant frequency breathing. And there's a lot of different versions of being able to do the breathing. A lot of people talk about the box breathing, and there's some things to be able to do that to make it easier. But the exercise that we did was timed out to be more in line with what we call resonant frequency breathing, where actually the frequency of our heart rate can line up best with the frequency of our respiratory rate. And there's something about that to be able is very calming to our brain. Any type of visualization, or like we mentioned, the progressive muscle relaxation or progressive muscle relaxation techniques. But there are some other things that we can do also, even just being in nature. There's been studies that have shown that just even looking at the color green will decrease your cortisol levels. It doesn't even have to be that you can be in the most urban setting. If you've got some nature images in your classroom or in your home, or even the color green, it will decrease your cortisol levels. One of the more popular ones recently that I've seen is the humming. Humming develops this kind of resonance and it can we're theorizing that it will vibrate onto the vagus nerve that travels down through the throat region and help to balance us out through signaling the vagus nerve. Laughing is one of the great things that we can do. So I will sometimes, when I'm taking a break, I will quite commonly find something that I can laugh at, because that's one of the quickest things. You can't be laughing while you're running away from a bear. We're going to show an example of one of those here. So I just want you to observe what you're feeling during this little presentation here of a nature experience. Um, Now, try to check in with your body and see how you feel when you do that. I've done this, showed this at one event that I was presenting at, and one of the audience members was like, "That does not make me feel any better. I'm allergic to bees," and I just increased my heart rate because that person experienced a threat. So clearly, it's not about these things are going to happen good for everybody. You kind of have to find what does it for yourself. I find that for myself, um, if I'm able to go out and take a 10-minute walk when I have my lunch break, that I'm able to really come back and be rebalanced. I do intentionally look around in the grass. I try to intentionally look up into the sun and express some gratitude as I'm doing that. But experiment with what works for yourself. I know that there can be some limitations in space. Right now, there's a limitation in the weather because it's really cold outside and it's not nearly as relaxing as it was 2 months ago. But work on it for yourself is what you can find and find what works for you, because it's that consistency that you're building that foundation for that's going to be able to help you so that you're going to be able to have um, a much better recovery than you would otherwise. And the next thing that we will commonly suggest is that as you're doing these things, we want you to just continue um, to to master them. So review what you're doing, see if it's working for you, revise it as necessary. Not everything works for everybody, and just because one person gets some calm from looking at nature and another person may not. Revise it for your personal situation and need, and then repeat it. And as you repeat it, that will then become your default system. And it's the type of thing where quite often we're like, oh, well, I've done it. I've done it. I did it for a day. I did it for a week. These things, if we're really going to be affecting that chronic stress and that chronic, our ability to be able to really get back into that recovery zone, you haven't failed when you've not feeling better after a week of doing it. Over the long term, it does take quite a bit of time to be able to bring us back into a good recovery zone, because we have to be able to create in our minds that we're the safety of that certainty that it's going to be happening for us. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't get some acute relief to some of our stress. There are things that, for example, even just like stacking, classes one after the other. I've got 12 classes that I have to teach in a day. They're every 30 minutes. So at 10:30, I've got these students ending, and then I've got these students beginning. How am I supposed to do that? It becomes really difficult to be able to do that. And that's the type of thing that in a day can increase the stress. But if I can find some times in there so that when I'm able to really be able to get myself in and get my parasympathetic nervous system activated, and my brain can trust that I can do that over time, that's how we're going to beat the burnout ultimately.
Awesome. Thanks, Will. For time's sake, you can just add it as we move forward. But if there's one strategy that you took from this, and know that what we shared at first on the QR code, we will share at the end. Videos like this and others were produced by Will's Health Institute, Medjugorje, sorry. And those are available in the Padlet for you at the end today. I'll share it at the end. But if there's something that stood out that you would like to implement right away that would help you, maybe some of the things that you've experienced so far that you've noticed a reduction in your stress. So just to wrap up, I want to highlight a little bit going back to that support for students and the instruction that we provide, being able to reduce stress. This could be a whole session on its own. So I'm just going to highlight a few things that it can do. When you think about learning, we can increase the stress by our environment. If the instruction is confusing, if we're confused being the ones delivering it, that's going to increase our stress. Katz and Pescher introduced this risk and resilience model. This is in relation to students with dyslexia, but I want to think about all your students, this applies, but particularly those who have learning difficulties, where really, like if you think about your students, right, even if maybe they've been diagnosed with difficulties, they don't all manifest the same. You're going to see some more extreme. I actually have 2 children with dyslexia, and they show up differently. Some with more extreme, my son with more extreme characteristics, my daughter with less. Some of that is due to this balance between risk and resilience factors. And I just want to point out, they've identified these through research. This critical risk factor is what? Trauma and stress, what we've been talking about today. It's going to affect students' ability to learn and our students who struggle, because every day, so my son, when he was in 2nd grade, he started throwing up every day before school. That physical manifestation that Will talked about, it's because his teacher was doing popcorn reading, which was terrifying. It was equivalent to him being chased by a bear for him to have to read out loud with dyslexia. It caused that strong of a physical response for him. It caused that much stress. And so this is something that we need to be aware of. He was not learning at any point when he was in that state. And going back to how this affects learning, it impairs their memory, that cognitive functioning, reduced creativity, learning consolidation that happens overnight. Is going to affect motivation. We're not going to be motivated to do something that we're stressed about, which is going to affect that long-term physical health and those learning strategies and their attention. And attention is critical for learning, right? So I just want to highlight quickly this impact on motivation. So motivation is tied to belief in self, interest level, and success. Success is really the facilitator. And so if they continue to experience failure, that's going to increase stress. They're going to have feelings of overwhelm, increased anxiety. They're going to drop their enthusiasm for learning. A lot of the behaviors that we see in students when they disengage, we can often equate to just the learner or bad behavior and not recognizing that they are most often in the stress response or even to that burnout level. Now, the good thing is that we can actually control these alterable variables. If a learner is struggling with stress, or as a teacher, it's not out of our control to influence. In fact, if a learner doesn't learn or has a difficult time, it's usually not just because of them, it's a breakdown of the environment, the curriculum, and the instruction. And as teachers and administrators, we help create and control that. So it's something we can do. The environment, is it safe? Are we bringing in those things that can help reduce stress for students? What curriculum are you using? Is it evidence-based so that students are successful with it? Is our instruction evidence-based and explicit to set students up for success? And all of this we can control and reduce stress. And that's why these are two of the factors that are resilience factors to mitigate that risk that we see in students. We can bring in these adaptive coping strategies like these parasympathetic activators or routines to our classroom to reduce stress for students. And the number one resilience factor is instruction for students who struggle in particular, but for all of our students. And I mentioned this before, but decades of evidence on the effectiveness of explicit instruction. And I'm going to talk about why and what that does to reduce stress. But if you have not read this book, this is a seminal piece of work, critical, changed me as a teacher, as a presenter in any subject that you're teaching, to make sure that our instruction is clear and concise and provides these supports and scaffolds to reduce stress, reduce cognitive load, and set students up for success. So I want you to think about if you'd give thumbs up or thumbs down, if these are results of something that explicit instruction does. If you think that would help to reduce stress, I want you to consider if you would give it a thumbs up. Yes, it would reduce stress. Thumbs down, no, it wouldn't. Explicit instruction reduces cognitive load and supports working memory. I would say thumbs up. Explicit instruction provides guided practice and scaffolded support to ensure success during initial learning, which is important for their feeling about that content and their confidence in the application of those skills. I would say thumbs up. And explicit instruction breaks down complex skills and makes sure they have the necessary prerequisite skills to be confident and be able to attach that to the new learning. Absolutely going to reduce stress. The instruction in explicit instruction is clear and concise language and consistent what? Those routines that Will talked about. And so yes, that reduces stress. And we provide that corrective and affirmative, that praise, both feedback to let them know where they're at and what they're doing well, absolutely is going to reduce stress. When we look at the research on motivation and academic outcomes, there are several dimensions, but the two that are most highly correlated are this. For us to be motivated and engaged back in learning and feel confident to do so, we have to drop the perceived difficulty while increasing self-efficacy, setting students up for success. Anything we teach or implement, including these strategies for stress, we need to ask ourselves, how can I drop the perceived difficulty for my students and set them up for success? And that in and of itself, if we can keep that in mind, will reduce stress and help increase that motivation for students. So as we wrap up today, I just want you to think back about these strategies that we've talked about to build stress resilience and help us get back to that recovery. So support. What are some of the things? I'd like you to think about one thing you could do to increase support of your teachers or your students. Is it providing more specific praise? Is it bringing in some of those elements of explicit instruction? Is it providing more resources if possible? And those balance strategies, is there a routine you can start to do with your students or in your class before a test or something that you know increases anxiety in the classroom? Could you bring in some of those breathing techniques? And again, we've got tons of videos for you in that Padlet for you to use that you could play in your classroom for yourself and for your students. So as we close out today, if you'd be willing to share in the chat again, maybe one thing you learned, one thing you have a question about, or one thing you want to learn more about, we'd love to hear that. And also put in the chat if you would like to have Will and I come present this, dive deeper, or cover just what we did today at your school or district, we'd be happy to. There's a little poll here. If you'd like to reach out to us, we'd love to talk to you. Or if you just have more questions and would like to know we'd be happy to just talk to you and say, hey, try this. If you want to consult with us on maybe how you could do that for your school or for your students, then that would be something we'd be happy to do. So we'll let that poll finish out. And then I want to bring up that Padlet link again so that you can get those resources. Again, PDF of our presentation today is available along with a couple of those videos that we did today, but additional videos for meditation, for breathing, for nature, for you to be able to use for yourself in your classroom. And we just want to express our gratitude to you for what you do. We know that it's high stress all the time, and hopefully some of these strategies can help you recover so that you can continue to do the amazing work that you do for your school and for your students. So thank you, Corey. I don't know if you wanted to say anything to close this out, but thank you again for having us today. And we wish you all a happy holiday.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Shantell and Will. Have a great holiday season, and we'll catch you next time.